What if one of the biggest things standing in between you and the life you want is something that you don't even believe? Because there are things that you want to do. And without a doubt, there are places that you want to go. There are even opportunities that I know you want to pursue. As far as I'm concerned, there are plenty of conversations that I know I need to have. So I'm sure there are conversations you need to have, things that you've been thinking about doing, making, or changing for years. And yet, for some reason, you haven't moved. And why is that? Or maybe you've started to move and you've gained a little bit of momentum. Maybe you started to gain a little bit of momentum, but you stopped. Perhaps you got in your head and you talked yourself out of it. For many people, this becomes a conversation, this argument that you have with yourself. And then what you do is you begin to chalk it up and say, you know what? I don't have enough time. Or maybe you decided that you just simply weren't ready. Or you looked at somebody and thought, you know what? Maybe they can have it, but that's not for me. I can't. So the question I have for you right now is, what I want you to consider is, what if the problem is not that you can't do it, but what if the problem was that somewhere along the way, you started to create a narrative and you started to believe that you couldn't? And that's what makes life a little bit more complicated, is that some of the beliefs that you have are starting to control your life. And these beliefs may be ones that you never chose consciously. Because I know none of us wake up and simply say, you know what, from this day forward, I'm going to believe that I'm not good enough. Nobody does that. That doesn't even sound right coming off of my tongue right now, but that's what we decide to do. You don't directly decide that you want to question everything you want to question every opportunity that comes your way. You didn't intentionally choose to believe that everybody else is more qualified than you. All right. But somewhere at some point in time, because of whatever event happened with us, we decided that when things don't work out, it must be because of me. It could have been a bad relationship that started to influence the way that you are because you got rejected. It could have been a job where you thought you were performing well and somebody criticized you, or maybe it was an actual failure and that thing has caused you to be more reluctant to start. Or maybe you thought you had the skills to do something, more skills than someone else, and now you're starting to compare their success to yours, and now you don't want to act. And so what tends to happen is we ended up creating a belief. And that belief may still be the thing that's causing you to make your decisions that you're making today. And that's what I want to talk about. Because right now, I think it's important for us to understand. Right now, I think it's important for us to understand the power of a limiting belief. And before we can learn how to destroy a limiting belief, we must first learn to recognize them, because you can't challenge a belief if you don't know that you have it. And you can't challenge something that you keep calling the truth, because the reality is a belief is not the truth. And so let's define it. What exactly is a limiting belief? In the simplest way for me to describe this, because I want to make I want to make sure it's clear. I don't want to be too complex. A limiting belief is something you believe about yourself, about other people, or what's possible that restricts you about what you're willing to attempt, pursue, accept, or become. And I want you to pay attention to the word belief in itself, because a belief is not a fact. But if you believe something long enough, you'll start treating it like it's one. And that's where most of our problems begin. I want you to think about it like as a kid. I know I'm not the only one. As a kid, you couldn't tell me that a monster was not under my bed. I told myself that so many times that when that light went off, it was a mad dash to the bed, because if I got there fast enough, that monster couldn't get me. And now I'm an adult, but we still believe that there are monsters. The monster of I'm too old, the monster of I'm too young, the monster of I'm not good enough, or I don't have enough experience, or I don't have enough education, or the monster that says I didn't come from the right background, or I'm not the best leader, or I can never lead in the way that this person leads. I'm not good with money. The monster that says I'm terrible with relationships, the monster that says I always mess things up, or people like me don't get these opportunities, or the monster that says I can never start a business. I'm a speaker. And oftentimes when I'm on stage, I rock it, come off stage without fail. There's always somebody who comes up to me at the end of the session saying, you know what? I don't know how you do it. I could never speak on a stage. Limiting belief. I could never go back to school is what some people say. That's a lie. I got a good buddy who got a GED. And he could have stopped there, but he didn't stop there. What he did is he got his GED. Years passed, years passed. And he started a business. Business was working well, but he said, I'm not done. He said, I wanted to go back and do more. And that same person who got his GED long ago, that person got his bachelor's, and now that person is pursuing his master's and is already saying that he wants to go for his PhD. Shout out to my boy Jorge, the reset king. We'll get to that another time. I'm gonna make sure I tag him in this. But you got to understand a limiting belief. When a limiting belief happens, it prevents you from being able to take action. We have the ability to be able to change that. No more speaking about how I can't lead at a level, or I'm not as talented as somebody else, or I'm not supposed to be in this room, because those are limiting beliefs. And the interesting thing about this is people don't walk around with a sign that says, I have a limiting belief. They just use other terms. I'm just being real. Oh, well, that's just different. Or they had a head start. I don't have the connections. We say all of these things because it makes us feel better. We tell ourselves we need to be more prepared and we need to learn more, gain more knowledge, watch another podcast. I need to wait till things settle down. I need to wait till I have a little bit more confidence. I'll do it when I'm no longer afraid. I'll do it when I know it's going to work. Of course you will at that point in time. But sometimes those things may be true. And sometimes because sometimes you do need more preparation. Because timing does matter. Timing matters because you can make a mistake. But don't allow timing to become a barrier. Somebody else may have had a head start, but we can't continue to look at that and say that's the reason why I can't do anything. And so the question I have for you is this. Is what you're saying an accurate assessment of yourself in the situation? Or is it an explanation that you've been using to become comfortable because it protects you from having to find out what might actually happen if you tried? Those are two very different things. And so what I want to use right now, I want to use this to set us up to talk about what a fact is, what fear is, or the belief. And one of the most important things that we have to learn is that we got to separate from what those things are. All right. Because when we mix them together all the time, man, this is where we start really just pushing ourselves backwards. And so let's just say there's a job you want. The fact might be that you don't have the experience needed. In a preferred area, right? You might not have the experience. Okay, so that's factual. But then your mind begins to take over and say that you know what, they're never going to hire me because I'm not qualified. There might be, there are probably 50, 60 people ahead of me. You know what, I'm going to embarrass myself if I go in on this interview. So I might not even apply. Now we're no longer dealing with facts. Now we're dealing with you coming in and making a prediction about something that may not even happen. Now we're dealing with your assumptions. Now we're dealing with fear. And if those thoughts are repeated often enough and long enough, they eventually become beliefs. And now you're not saying that I may have a gap in experience. You're now switching it, saying that I'm not the type of person who they would hire. I'm not the type of person who should get this opportunity. I need you to see that difference. One is about the situation, and the other has become about identity. And that's how limiting beliefs become dangerous. That's how they become hard. They take one experience and then they turn it into an identity. I failed becomes I'm a failure, right? I was rejected turns into they didn't want me. This bad decision becomes, you know what, I can't trust myself to do anything. Business didn't work, so I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not good at relationships because this one relationship ended, so it must be me because I'm difficult to love. That's not what it is. Limiting beliefs, if we don't stop them in their tracks, they will continue to go on. And we fall in this vicious cycle of just simply repeating it. We repeat it over and over again. If every time I had to go and speak in front of an audience, if I told myself I was not going to speak as good as this other speaker, eventually it would start to take toll. But I recognize I'm not like them. I am me. And this is why I want you to start paying attention to your language, because when you use negative self-talk, when you talk negative about yourself, you start to expose these different beliefs that are hidden under the words that you're saying. And so I need us to start being intentional and listening for words like, when we put labels on things like always and never, everybody, I can't, I'm not this kind of person. They can do it, but I can't. This is just who I am. Or here's the famous one. It is what it is. Because when you say that, when you say it is what it is, or you say that's just who I am, you're taking something that could possibly be changed and you're giving it a state of permanence. That's not healthy. And so now I want to talk about how that belief can become a prison. Because once you start believing something about yourself, you start to look for the evidence that proves that. If you believe you're not good enough, you start to look at every mistake that you make and say, check, check. If you think everybody is better than you, check. You start looking for those things. It's just this fallacy that happens when you start to look for them. But what do you ignore? In this moment, most people who think this way, you end up ignoring the times that you won. You ignore the times that you figured it out. You ignore the skills that you developed. You ignore the evidence that contradicts the belief. And this is important for us to understand right now because your mind does not always give equal weight to every piece of information. Once you become convinced of something, you can begin interpreting your experiences through that belief. So now instead of asking, what does this situation actually mean? You're looking at the situation and saying, how does this situation prove what I already believe? You're looking for something to justify the way that you believe. And you may not even realize that you're doing it. You believe that I am not insert this person. So when someone comes up and asks you to step up, you start focusing on everything that's a flaw for you instead of the things that they know of you and that they're looking for. You don't believe you're smart enough. So when you struggle to understand something, you say, yep, see, that's what it is. I've never been able to learn this. I've never been able to learn a new language. New skills have always been a challenge for me. You believe that you're bad at relationships. So every disagreement becomes proof that relationships do not work because of you. Not that there was another person involved in it, but they don't work because of you. They don't work because of me. Let me just say that. So every setback that you have becomes evidence that you should stop trying. And this is how our belief becomes a prison. Not because somebody took the key, opened the door, let you walk in and then slammed it and locked it. No, but because you eventually stopped checking to see if this door was locked. You just assumed that it is. So you never went to pull it open again and you've trapped yourself. And we can do better than that. Because where these beliefs come from goes a little bit deeper. Because some of the beliefs that you have about yourself are ones that you carry before you even had the ability to question them. You know, and maybe you grew up hearing that, you know, people like you don't succeed. Maybe you grew up hearing that money is hard to come by or that, you know, you got to be lucky to succeed. But if we're realistic, you know, that's a wrong way of thinking. Being told that you talk too much, you're not athletic enough, you're not academic, you've always been the shy one in the family. Or here's one, you're the strong one, so you don't need help. Those are the things that cause people to have these limiting beliefs. Because when I do realize I need help, now I don't even want to speak up. Maybe those people were speaking from their own experiences and their fears and their disappointments, their own understanding of the world. But because you heard it and you heard it at such a young age and you made those mistakes at a young age, you started to carry it. It became your prison. And eventually somebody else came and said something else. And that became something you started saying to yourself. You started to believe that as well. And that's the part that we all have to gather. Not every voice in your head started with you. And some of the things that we believe about ourselves may be somebody else's fear that has been planted in us, and then we've watered it and it's grown. Somebody else's limitation, their poor experiences, somebody else's inability to see what was possible for them became what's impossible for you. And now you're living in their conclusions. That's not it. I remember somebody telling me that, you know what, I don't know why you want to go and try to join the Marine Corps. That's not for you. The words, Black people don't join the Marine Corps. Watch me. 22 and a half years later, successful Marine Corps career, combat decorated, leadership, taught at every level, and look where I am now. Nobody taught me what success looked like. I had to go and do it for myself. So I want you to ask yourself, who taught you what was possible? Who taught you what success looked like? Who taught you what failure looked like? Who taught you how much risk was acceptable? When you should press pause and when you should start? Who taught you whether or not you were smart or not? Who told you that? And why do you believe it? Who told you who told you you were only capable of doing X or becoming Y and doing Z? But then you got to ask the other question, were they right? And if you say they were right, then what's the evidence of that? What is the evidence? You know, I've been in therapy, and one thing my therapist said, he says, when you're thinking like this, I want you to always come back to the question of what's the evidence say? What is the evidence saying to you about this? Does your evidence say that you're a bad person, or are you just thinking that you're a bad person? Because somebody can give you advice based on what they did to survive, and that has nothing to do with the person that you're capable of becoming. And at some point, you have to decide. You have to decide whether the beliefs that you inherited still deserve a level of authority over your life that you've been giving it. Or you can decide that I'm going to change things. A limiting belief doesn't always sound negative either. Sometimes it sounds like, sometimes we think that all the limiting beliefs, we think that they sound like I'm worthless. Sometimes they sound positive. They sound reasonable. They sound responsible. They sound they sound very mature, you know? Going back to what I mentioned, you know what I'm saying? Like I've met so many people in business who just say, I'm just waiting on the right time to move. I got to get all my ducks in a row before this happens. Or you know what? I'm gonna get one more certification before I start training clients. I'm gonna save a little bit more money before I open the business, or before I hire a coach, I'm gonna get in better shape because I know I got to take the photos to let them see me. No, no, stop trying to do so much preparation before you start doing and just start doing. Because preparation is one thing, but sometimes we get so caught up in preparation that that we don't do anything, and that preparation becomes you hiding. And so there's a difference between you being patient and you just intentionally avoiding something because you're worried about what might happen based on those limiting beliefs. Strategy is one thing, and just being scared is another. And I can tell you, I've had strategy and I've been scared. But during that time, I had to look at what were the risks. And sometimes I wanted to risk um, the person who I thought I was and the person that I wanted to be. And as long as you are willing to sit with yourself and do that, you can start making some changes. You don't have to look at life from the standpoint of I could have done it. I could have written the book, or, I could have gone to trade school and I could be working in this field right now, or I could have pursued this opportunity. Because now when you make the decision to start, you now are at the point where you have to face reality, where you have to learn, where you have to struggle. And in that moment, when we get in there, sometimes it's uncomfortable. And then we want to revert back to what we're used to. When you revert back to what you're used to, that's the easiest way. And we don't need to do that. And so what we got to take control of is understanding that our beliefs are sometimes making the decision before we do. Meaning, before I even attempt something, I'm leaning on this more than me just trying it. How many opportunities have you rejected before anybody else had the opportunity to reject you? Whether it was applying for a job, um, asking for the promotion, speaking up in a meeting, introducing yourself to somebody that you've looked up to, starting a YouTube channel, not making the phone call. There are so many times that we had opportunities right there in front of us, but we didn't jump on it. And then we would tell ourselves that, you know what, that simply the opportunity just wasn't available for me. Nobody told you no. You told yourself no on their behalf. Not asking is the same thing as being told no. And this is what a limiting belief will do for you. They convince you that you already know the outcome. Let's think about that. A limiting belief will convince you that you already know the outcome. And last I checked, you're not a fortune teller. Neither am I. So when you say that you're too far behind in comparison to who and to what? Like, we've got to stop looking at where other people are and saying, this is where I'm supposed to be. Because when you do that, you create a limiting belief. There are so many times we count ourselves out. Try counting yourself in. Try counting yourself in, saying, you know what, this is my time. This is going to be my day. There are enough people in the world who are going to tell you no. There are enough doors that are going to be slammed in your face. You do not need to be the one who are doing it. There are enough situations in your life that are not going to work out the way that you want them to. So don't become the person that stands in your own way. There's enough life rejection that's going to happen naturally. And so for you to be the person to reject yourself before the world does it, man, that's a double whammy right there. And so we got to get away from that. Get away from looking at what everybody else is doing, placing those limiting beliefs on ourselves, and just look at what you're doing. Look at what you want to do. That's the comparison trap. Allowing their success, other people's success, to tell you what yours is supposed to look like. If I measure my success on everybody else's, man, I can see that. What is it? Comparison is the thief of all joy. You start thinking everybody else is more talented and more confident than you are. They started earlier than you. They know all the right people. They look better on camera. They've got a better setup. They've got a better car. Everybody doesn't have the same equal starting points. Some people, yes, in fact, do have greater advantages. Some people have access to things that you do not. Some people may receive other opportunities, but you have a gift that is uniquely yours. And just because somebody else has the advantage over you in this area doesn't make it impossible for you. That's the mistake we all make. Doesn't mean that you can't make a move. It's chess. You will have an opportunity to make a move. And if you lose one game, it doesn't mean that you can't play again. It doesn't mean that you won't be able to improve. I don't care how much experience somebody else has. You have your life that started from your birth and will go all the way to the end of when you leave this world at your death. And so don't spend so many chapters of your life looking at your chapter 15 and basing it based on their chapter 30. Because if you do that, you'll never begin. And if you do begin, you'll continue to look at what they're doing and check in and see what's happening. And that's how that imposter syndrome just creeps its way in. Just creeps its way on in there because you're thinking, man, if you do make it, I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be here. Yeah, you got invited now. So you're supposed to be here. You're supposed to be here. So instead of thinking that I shouldn't be here, instead of thinking, why did I get invited to the table? Go sit at the table and then you'll figure it out. You'll figure out that maybe, you know what? Not everybody does know more than I do. Stop saying I'm the least qualified person in the room and see where you match with other people. Be physically present. Be mentally present. And don't allow your mind to pull you away from a situation because that's going to change how you show up. Don't stay quiet when you know you have the opportunity to speak up. Yeah, sure. You may over prepare because you're terrified of making a mistake, but that doesn't mean that you can't handle whatever the task is. This is your opportunity to break free from the prison that you've created in your mind. This is your opportunity to take the key, unlock that door that you put the deadbolt on and say that I'm going to start walking into a new purpose. Because the days of comparing myself, the days of comparing yourself should be over. And it's time for us to really start looking at who we are so we can dig beneath the surface to figure out what is causing us to be this way. What is making me think this way? What is making me wake up every day thinking that I'm not capable of doing these things? Instead, we should be getting up and looking at, I am qualified. I have made it through these challenges. I do have this level of education. Yes, I failed before, but these failures have also led me to different successes. We have to change our perspective, change our lenses, the way that we see a problem. You don't have to become everybody else in the room. You don't have to become everybody else in the room because you're in the room and you have a seat. And that seat is designed for you. This is where you're supposed to be. So it doesn't matter what type of leadership you've been exposed to, what type of education you've been exposed to. This is you. This is where you're supposed to be. This is your time. And so where have you accepted this thing as truth? Where have you accepted limiting beliefs in your life? This is where you have to really reflect and think about that. And then think about the people who are watching you, who may be looking to you as the North Star. You know, what do you believe about yourself that you've never actually tested? Like, take it back to the lab. Take everything that you're looking at and everything that you're struggling with and take it back to the lab and test it. What have you accepted as being permanent that just might be temporary? You know, what are you looking at that's impossible that you just have never been to the lab to really figure it out? You know, I teach jujitsu. My gym is called the lab. And I love it because we go there and we put theories to the test. Does this technique work? Does this technique work? And if it works, then I become more confident in that technique. And if it doesn't work, then what caused it not to work? I'm in the lab. And we have to do that same thing with ourselves when it comes to limiting beliefs. Test it to see if it's true. Test these hypotheses to see if they are true. If you're telling yourself you can't do all of these things, look for the evidence. Test the theories. Test everything without getting overwhelmed. And then use every setback as an opportunity for you to prove that I can do it. Go back to the drawing board. Because the current conditions does not mean that it's a permanent identity. You are not necessarily your worst decision, and you're not necessarily your biggest failure either. And so I want us to just take a step back and look at every label you've given yourself and every label that was possibly given to you by somebody else. And then ask yourself, do I want to feel this way in the next 10 years? Is this really who I think I am? Or is this because of somebody else? Be intentional about sitting still, looking in the mirror, because there's a person that you know very well. That person that's looking back at you. You know what that person has been going through. You know every situation from the time you were born into now. You know where you failed. You know where you've won. You know what you're afraid of. All of these things, you have it in your mind. You know the mistakes, you know the regrets, you know every reason that the person, you know every reason the person might not be able to do what you're dreaming about. And because you know that version of yourself so well, it can be difficult imagining becoming somebody different. Every version of you that's ever existed at some point in time had to exist and do something for the first time. We don't know what we don't know. So there was a time where you couldn't make it through this situation. And then there was another time where you were able to make it through that situation. There was a time where you didn't have the skill and a time where you went and you developed those skills. So why are we looking for perfection? Why are we looking to have it all together? Why are we looking for a final version when we're starting? And why have you decided that this is the most confident that you could ever be or the most disciplined that you will ever be? Why? It's because of limiting beliefs. And you have the power to be as capable. You have the power to become even more capable than you ever thought you could be. But it's going to take a little bit of courage. It's going to take you stepping out to be able to say that, you know what? I may not be where I want to be. And you know where I'm going, but I'm not where I used to be. And so the first thing that needs to happen is we need to change the way that we think. In my book, I talk about abundant positive language. And this is how we use our mind to truly say that I'm going to catch myself in these moments when I'm talking about myself in a way that's negative, and I'm going to change it. And so I'm not asking you to stand in front of a mirror tomorrow morning and tell yourself that you can do absolutely anything. That's not what this is about. But what I am doing is I'm telling you that you can start destroying limiting beliefs by not ignoring the reality, because that's not what I'm asking you to do. You destroy limiting belief by understanding that I just need to take it one step at a time. By understanding that I just need to create a new habit. By understanding that I need to just become incredibly keen on taking massive action towards one thing. One, asking the question, is it true? The evidence. Two, how do I know this? Three, where did I learn this? When did I start to believe this? And what evidence contradicted? Like, these are the questions that we have to ask ourselves. And when you start to go through all of those, you start realizing, you know what, this came from mom. Oh, this came from the coworker. Oh, this came because of the one time I failed. Well, you know what? Now, what would you do differently? Because when you ask yourself that question, you might start to figure out how much power that belief has had over your life. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to identify one belief. I'm not looking for you to identify 10. I'm not looking for you to identify 20. I want you to identify one belief that might be limiting the way that you show up in life. And it could be any of the things that I've mentioned. You're too far behind. You don't have the discipline. You're not the leader. You can't stop smoking. You can't stop drinking. You can't stop partying. You can't stop getting in bad relationships. You don't belong. You're not ready. People like me don't get these opportunities. Whatever it is, I don't care. I want you to write down that one thing. And then underneath it, I want you to answer 4 questions. 1, where did this belief come from? 2, what experiences do I have that serve as evidence that this is true? 3, what evidence have I ignored that suggests that it might not be completely true? And 4, what would I do differently if I stopped believing it? Now, I don't want you to rush through these. So if you got to stop the video, rewind it, and get the questions again, please do so. Because the goal is not to simply make yourself feel good right here. I want you to become more aware, because awareness is everything. Because you can't destroy what you refuse to identify, and you can't challenge. You have to be able to challenge the thing that you keep calling truth. Over time, you've learned what was possible. Over time, you've learned what's not possible. And you begin to believe both of those things. Some beliefs help you understand an earlier version of your life. Some beliefs have been there and they have helped you survive. Other beliefs have come from people who have loved you and they've tried to protect you. And then, of course, because I've failed before, because I've had fears before, I know where some of those come from. But I know I have not allowed those things to define me for a lifetime. And now it's your opportunity to start doing the same. Because the question is no longer simply, what do I believe? The question is what I believe helping me become who I'm capable of becoming? And if the answer is no, then maybe it's time to challenge it, because you deserve to do more with your life. You deserve to do more with your life than questioning the person that you are today without looking at where you could actually be. In the next video, we're going to go much deeper. All right. And we're going to talk about where these beliefs actually come from. We tapped on it, but we didn't really go as deep because before a limiting belief became your voice, it belonged to somebody else. And when you understand where those beliefs really come from, then you can start better deciding if this thing still deserves to be in my life. This series is on destroying limiting beliefs. And if elevation requires change, sometimes the first thing that has to change is what you believe is possible for you. I'll see you on the next one. Let's go.